The morning air held that peculiar stillness that makes one acutely aware of one's own breathing. Soft ribbons of sunlight filtered through half-drawn blinds as I sat in the back seat, my phone a convenient distraction from the growing awareness I'd been trying to ignore for weeks. Marcus had been our family chauffeur for nearly 5 years. Professional, courteous, reliable, all the qualities one would expect. But recently, something had shifted between us, a subtle change in the atmosphere whenever we shared the confined space of a car. He wasn't what you'd expect from someone in his position. Tall with an understated confidence, Marcus carried himself with a quiet dignity. His eyes, deep brown and strikingly perceptive, seemed to hold conversations his lips wouldn't dare initiate. There was an unspoken intelligence in the way he navigated not just the city streets, but the delicate social boundaries of his profession. I'd begun noticing the small things, the way his gaze lingered a moment too long when he handed me my belongings, how his fingers sometimes brushed against mine when opening doors, the subtle shift in his tone when addressing me directly. Each instance sent a disconcerting flutter through my chest, a feeling I deliberately refused to name. That particular morning, traffic had congealed into a frustrating standstill. The silence between us felt charged, filled with unspoken thoughts that seemed to press against the windows of the car. "You seem distracted today," Marcus said, his voice breaking through the quiet. His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, searching. I startled slightly, unprepared for the personal observation. "Just tired," I replied, forcing a smile that felt brittle even to me. "Work has been demanding lately." His eyes remained on mine through the mirror for a moment longer than necessary. "You push yourself too hard," he said, his voice carrying a note of concern that seemed to transcend professional courtesy. "Everyone deserves moments of respite." The simple observation felt weighted with meaning, and I found myself suddenly aware of my breathing, of the constriction in my chest that had nothing to do with fatigue. I shifted uncomfortably, uncertain how to navigate this subtle deviation from our established dynamic. When we finally arrived at my destination, I reached for the door handle, eager to escape the confines of the car and the complicated emotions it contained. But before I could exit, Marcus's hand brushed against mine, a fleeting touch that nonetheless sent electricity coursing through my veins. "Wait," he said, his voice low and uncertain. "There's something I need to tell you." I froze, my breath catching somewhere between my chest and throat. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely audible. His hesitation was palpable, a tangible thing filling the space between us. "I've been thinking about you," he finally admitted, his eyes revealing a vulnerability I'd never seen in him before. In ways that go beyond my position. My mind raced, trying to process his words while simultaneously acknowledging the part of me that had been anticipating this moment with equal measures of dread and longing. Everything about this situation violated the carefully constructed boundaries of our professional relationship, yet I couldn't deny the flutter of something dangerous and exhilarating in my chest. "Marcus, we can't," I began, but the words felt hollow, undermined by the heat rising to my cheeks and the tremor in my voice. "Please," he interrupted, his fingers gently encircling my wrist. "Don't dismiss this until you've heard me out." I wanted to pull away, to assert the propriety that should have governed our interaction. But his touch awakened something I'd been suppressing for longer than I cared to admit. Before I could formulate a response, he leaned forward, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that was both tender and charged with restrained passion. For a brief, suspended moment, the world beyond the car ceased to exist. There were no social expectations, no marital vows, no professional boundaries, just the unexpected connection between two people who had circled each other for too long. Reality intruded with brutal swiftness. I pulled back, breathless and disoriented. "This is wrong," I whispered, though my body betrayed me by leaning imperceptibly closer. "I know," he acknowledged, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. But I couldn't continue pretending that what I feel isn't real. His words resonated within me, touching something that had been dormant for far too long. I wanted to be sensible, to walk away before this situation spiraled beyond retrieval. But in that moment, rationality seemed a distant concept, overshadowed by the intensity of his gaze and the warmth of his proximity. "This could ruin everything," I whispered, giving voice to the fear that clawed at the edges of my consciousness. "If anyone found out—" "They won't," he assured me, his confidence both reassuring and alarming. "This remains between us." A part of me wanted to believe him, to embrace the fantasy that we could contain this transgression within the confines of secrecy. But deeper knowledge told me that such boundaries were illusory, that crossing this line would inevitably alter the fabric of my existence, my reputation, my marriage, my sense of self. Yet when his lips found mine again, these considerations receded into the background. In that moment, all that mattered was the way his presence seemed to fill the empty spaces within me, how his touch temporarily silenced the persistent whispers of loneliness and doubt that had become my constant companions. The days that followed unfolded in a haze of contradictions. Marcus created opportunities for us to be alone, lingering after dropping me off, sending messages under the guise of confirming schedules. Each interaction pulled me deeper into a labyrinth of emotions I knew I should resist, but couldn't bring myself to escape. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in watercolor hues, Marcus appeared at my doorstep unannounced. My husband was away on business, and the children slept soundly upstairs, unaware of the line their mother was about to cross. "I needed to see you," he said simply, his eyes conveying what words could not articulate. I should have sent him away. I should have reinforced the boundaries that existed for a reason. Instead, I stepped aside, allowing him to enter not just my home but the innermost chambers of my life. We sat in the living room, the space between us charged with unexpressed desire. Marcus reached out, his fingers grazing mine with deliberate gentleness. "You're constantly in my thoughts," he confessed, his voice low and intimate in the quiet house. The admission shattered the last of my resistance. All the conflicting emotions, the guilt, the longing, the forbidden nature of our connection, converged in that moment. His embrace offered temporary shelter from the storm of my own making, a respite I knew would exact its price later. Morning arrived with harsh clarity. Marcus had departed, leaving only a handwritten note. "Last night will forever remain in my heart." As I stared at the words, reality descended upon me with crushing weight. What had I done? How had I allowed myself to fall so far from the person I believed myself to be? Yet even as I silently vowed this transgression would never repeat itself, I recognized the fundamental shift that had occurred. The line had been crossed, and there was no returning to the comfortable ignorance of before. In the weeks that followed, Marcus and I continued our clandestine encounters. We were careful, always mindful of the potential consequences, but the allure of our forbidden connection proved too powerful to resist. It was a precarious existence, balanced on the edge of discovery, yet the moments of connection seemed to justify the risk. One evening, as twilight settled over the empty house, Marcus and I found ourselves alone again. My husband's business trip had created another opportunity, another moment where choice presented itself. "I can't continue pretending," Marcus said, breaking the silence that had settled between us. "What I feel for you has become essential to me." His declaration hung in the air, both beautiful and terrifying in its implications. I wanted to echo his sentiments, to confess that my feelings mirrored his own. But fear tightened its grip around my heart. "Marcus," I whispered, my voice unsteady, "what we're doing, it could destroy everything." "No one needs to know," he countered, his certainty a stark contrast to my doubt. "This remains between us." I longed to believe him, to trust that our secret could remain contained and harmless. But wisdom whispered otherwise. The world rarely accommodates such transgressions without exacting a price. The potential consequences loomed large: shattered trust, broken families, irreparable damage to lives beyond just our own. Yet when Marcus drew me close, these considerations faded once more. In his embrace, I found temporary escape from the weight of responsibilities and expectations that had long since become burdensome. His touch offered the illusion of freedom, of being seen and desired for myself rather than for the roles I fulfilled. As months passed, the weight of our secret grew increasingly oppressive. I noticed changes in myself that I couldn't ignore: constant distraction, perpetual vigilance, a growing distance from the life I was supposed to be living. My relationship with my husband suffered from my emotional absence, and each interaction with my children was tainted by the knowledge of my betrayal. One afternoon, as Marcus drove me home, the accumulated pressure finally broke through. "We can't continue this," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "It's destroying me from within." Marcus glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his expression reflecting pain that matched my own. "I understand," he acknowledged quietly. "But the thought of losing you—" "We don't have a choice," I interrupted, tears streaming down my face. "This isn't fair, not to my husband, not to my children, not even to us. We're living a fiction that can only end in pain." Silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the sound of my quiet sobs. Finally, Marcus nodded, acceptance settling over his features. "You're right," he conceded. "For everyone's sake, this needs to end." The subsequent weeks were an exercise in restraint and recovery. Marcus and I maintained a strictly professional relationship, though the current of what had transpired remained an unspoken presence. The transition was painful, often unbearably so, but necessary. Gradually, I began the process of repairing what had been damaged. I recommitted myself to my marriage, not just physically, but emotionally. I became more present with my children, treasuring the moments that family life offered. None of it was easy, but it was essential. In retrospect, I recognize that crossing that boundary was a profound mistake, one born of loneliness and desire, but a mistake nonetheless. The momentary pleasure could never justify the potential destruction it threatened to unleash. True strength, I learned, doesn't lie in pursuing forbidden passions, but in honoring commitments, respecting boundaries, and making choices that protect rather than endanger the foundations of one's life. The most difficult lesson was perhaps the most important. Love isn't merely about passion or desire. It's about choices, daily, sometimes difficult choices, that honor the people we've committed ourselves to. It's about recognizing that our actions ripple outward, affecting lives beyond our own. This experience taught me that emotions, however powerful, must sometimes be acknowledged but not acted upon. That boundaries exist not to constrain us, but to protect what matters most. And that the most meaningful form of love often lies not in what we pursue, but in what we choose to set aside for the greater good. This story reminds us that emotions can be powerful and confusing, but not every desire should be followed. Crossing boundaries can lead to consequences that affect not just ourselves, but everyone we care about. True strength comes from honoring commitments and choosing what's right, even when it's difficult.